say to the honourable gentleman, I will not tolerate such behaviour. If you want to go out now, but if you stand again, I'll lord you out. Make your mind up. Either shut up and get out.
Westminster descends into open confrontation as tensions inside the chamber reach boiling point. MPs from multiple parties rise to challenge Prime Minister Keir Starmer, accusing him of losing control of both his government and the country. Shouts echo across the floor as questions on digital ID, civil liberties and immigration are met with visible irritation from the Prime Minister. What should have been a routine parliamentary exchange quickly spirals into chaos. The Speaker struggles to maintain order as Starmer reacts sharply to criticism, signalling that this debate is no longer about policy detail, but about authority, credibility, and leadership itself. Behind the shouting in the chamber lies a deeper unease. MPs warn that a quiet expansion of state power is already underway, from facial recognition technology to arrests over social media posts. The proposed digital ID scheme has become the flashpoint, symbolising fears of government overreach. Ministers insist it is about security, yet critics see control. Trust is wearing thin, and the public is being asked to accept sweeping changes with little explanation. If you want to understand what is really happening behind closed doors in Westminster, subscribe now and stay informed. The debate reaches a new intensity when Reform UK MP Lee Anderson takes the floor. His attack is blunt and unapologetic. He accuses the government of using the digital ID proposal as a distraction from its failure to control illegal immigration. If ministers were truly serious, he argues, they would detain and deport those crossing the channel illegally, rather than monitoring law-abiding citizens. Anderson describes the scheme as a pathetic attempt by a weak Prime Minister, a remark that sends shockwaves through the chamber. Eyes turn towards Keir Starmer, whose reaction is visibly strained. The accusation cuts deeper than policy. It questions competence, authority, and moral credibility. What was once framed as administrative reform is now exposed as a symbol of a government accused of targeting ordinary people while refusing to confront its own failures. The confrontation does not end with a single speech. One by one, MPs from different benches rise to condemn what they describe as a dangerous double standard. They argue that ordinary British citizens are being burdened with new layers of surveillance, while those entering the country illegally face few immediate consequences. The anger in the chamber is no longer partisan. It is shared. Several MPs question why digital identification is deemed necessary for workers who already prove their status through national insurance numbers, passports, and driving licenses. Others warn that the proposal risks criminalising everyday life, turning routine employment into a matter of constant verification. The language grows sharper as patience wears thin. Representatives of working-class constituencies speak of families who have played by the rules for generations, paid their taxes, and respected the law. These people, they insist, are now being treated with suspicion because of the government's inability to enforce existing systems. The accusation is clear. Instead of fixing broken borders and failed policies, ministers are shifting the burden onto compliant citizens. As the debate escalates, interruptions become frequent. Murmurs turn to shouts, and the Speaker repeatedly calls for order. The chamber reflects a growing national mood, not confusion, but resentment. For many MPs, this is no longer a technical argument about identification. It is about fairness, dignity, and whether the state still distinguishes between those who obey the law and those who do not. The atmosphere finally snaps. As criticism intensifies, Keir Starmer responds with visible frustration, repeatedly interrupting MPs and dismissing their concerns. What began as firm defence quickly turns combative. Voices clash across the chamber. MPs shout for answers, accusing the Prime Minister of evasion and contempt for Parliament. The tension is no longer contained by procedure. The Speaker rises, calling for calm, but the damage is already done. Starmer's reactions only fuel the fury. Opposition MPs accuse him of arrogance, while members from his own side look increasingly uncomfortable. The chamber descends into disorder as repeated calls of "answer the question" echo from the benches. It is a rare and humiliating moment for a sitting Prime Minister. Then comes the decisive intervention. Lindsay Hoyle, invoking his authority, steps in to restore order. His message is clear and uncompromising. Parliamentary rules will be respected, regardless of rank. Starmer is, instructed to leave the chamber until proceedings can continue properly. Gasps ripple through the room. As the Prime Minister exits, the symbolism is unmistakable. Power has shifted, if only briefly. The authority of the office has been publicly challenged and curtailed. This is no longer a disagreement over digital ID or immigration policy. It is a confrontation over accountability itself. For viewers, this is the moment of realization. A leader who claims control has been forced to retreat under pressure from elected representatives. The image lingers. A government losing its grip, and a parliament asserting that even the most powerful must answer to scrutiny. The crisis has reached its peak, and nothing will look the same again. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the debate shifts from noise to substance. MPs begin laying out what they describe as the central hypocrisy of the government's position. On one side are British citizens, workers, employers, families, being told they must submit to a new digital identification system simply to earn a living. On the other are individuals who entered the country illegally, many without any documentation at all, yet who are housed, supported, and processed through the system with minimal scrutiny. The contrast is stark, and MPs ensure it is heard. Several speakers argue that the government already possesses the tools it needs. National insurance numbers, passports, driving licenses, and existing right-to-work checks have functioned for decades. Digital ID, they say, adds nothing to enforcement but introduces a permanent mechanism of monitoring. The question is repeated again and again. If the state cannot enforce the rules it already has, why should citizens trust it with even greater power? Attention returns to Keir Starmer and his failure to answer this contradiction directly. MPs accuse him of choosing the path of least resistance, targeting those who comply with the law rather than confronting the harder task of border enforcement and removals. One member warns that this approach inverts justice itself, rewarding illegality while penalising obedience. The language used in the chamber grows more serious. This is no longer framed as an inconvenience, but as a breach of the social contract. Citizens accept authority, MPs argue, only when it is exercised fairly and proportionately. When the burden consistently falls on the compliant, respect for the law begins to erode. Trust, once lost, is difficult to rebuild. Several MPs raise concerns about precedent. If digital ID becomes mandatory for work today, what follows tomorrow? Access to healthcare, travel, banking, or speech? They caution that freedoms are rarely removed all at once. They are narrowed gradually, justified by efficiency and security, until the public realises too late how much has been surrendered. The chamber reflects a broader national anxiety. Voters who already feel overlooked now see confirmation of their fears, that government decisions are made for administrative convenience rather than public consent. The sense of distance between those who govern and those who are governed widens further. As this chapter closes, the issue is no longer framed as immigration or technology alone. It is about fairness, proportionality, and whether the state still serves the people it represents. MPs make one thing clear: a government that demands compliance without legitimacy risks losing both. The confrontation may have ended, but the damage to trust is only beginning to show. As the debate draws on, the focus widens beyond the immediate clash in Parliament. MPs begin to frame the digital ID controversy as part of a much larger shift in the relationship between the state and the individual. This is no longer presented as a single policy proposal, but as a warning sign. Britain, they argue, is approaching a crossroads where convenience and control risk overtaking consent and liberty. Several speakers remind the House that Britain's democratic system rests not on a written constitution, but on restraint, precedent, and trust. When governments expand their reach without clear public approval, those unwritten safeguards weaken. Digital ID, combined with facial recognition technology and increased monitoring of online speech, is portrayed as a slow but deliberate tightening of authority. Each measure may appear minor in isolation, but together they form a pattern that troubles even long-serving parliamentarians. Concerns are raised about how easily such systems could be repurposed. A tool introduced to regulate work today could be extended to travel tomorrow, access to services the day after, and expression itself further down the line. MPs stress that once infrastructure for control exists, future governments, of any political colour, may be tempted to use it. Safeguards promised today may not survive tomorrow's crisis. Attention again turns to Keir Starmer, not simply as a political figure, but as a symbol of this broader drift. Critics argue that his leadership style reflects a managerial approach to power, one that prioritises systems and compliance over consent and persuasion. This, they say, explains the growing disconnect between government rhetoric and public sentiment. The language inside the chamber grows reflective, even sombre. MPs speak of voters who feel watched rather than represented, regulated rather than respected. They warn that when citizens begin to see the state as an adversary rather than a protector, democratic stability is at risk. Participation declines, cynicism rises, and politics hardens into confrontation. Importantly, this concern is not confined to one party. MPs from across the House acknowledge that public trust, once broken, cannot be restored through enforcement or technology. It requires transparency, accountability, and a willingness to listen. Without those elements, authority becomes brittle, dependent on compliance rather than legitimacy. As the chapter closes, the message is clear. Britain is not yet an authoritarian state, but neither is it immune to erosion. Democracies rarely collapse overnight. They weaken gradually through small decisions that go unchallenged. The digital ID debate has become the moment when many MPs believe that challenge must finally be made. What is at stake is not simply how people prove who they are, but whether freedom remains the default condition of British life, or something that must increasingly be requested, justified, and approved. As the debate comes to an end, one truth is impossible to ignore. What unfolded inside Parliament was not merely a clash of personalities or a disagreement over technology. It was a defining moment that revealed how fragile the bond between government and governed has become. MPs leave the chamber knowing that the argument over digital ID has opened a much deeper question about power, trust, and consent in modern Britain. Outside Westminster, the reaction is already spreading. Constituents who watch the exchange recognise themselves in the arguments being made. They are not radicals or criminals. They are ordinary people who work, pay taxes, and expect the state to treat them fairly. For many, the idea that they must now prove their identity through a government-controlled digital system feels like a step too far. The anger expressed in Parliament reflects a growing unease across the country. The pressure on Keir Starmer is now intensifying. Critics argue that leadership is not measured by how firmly rules are enforced, but by how convincingly they are justified. This controversy has exposed a widening gap between policymakers and the public they claim to serve. If that gap continues to grow, authority will rest on compliance alone, not legitimacy. MPs warn that this moment will not simply fade away. The questions raised about surveillance, fairness, and the unequal treatment of citizens will return in future debates, elections, and public discourse. Whether the government listens or doubles down will shape its political fate. History shows that governments which ignore clear warnings rarely recover unscathed. Yet this chapter is not only about criticism, it is also about responsibility. Democracies endure when citizens remain engaged, informed, and willing to challenge decisions that affect their freedoms. Silence, MPs caution, is what allows gradual erosion to continue unchecked. Debate, scrutiny, and participation are not threats to democracy. They are its safeguards. The choice now rests with the public as much as with those in power. Britain can move towards a model of governance built on trust, transparency, and consent, or it can drift towards one defined by systems, surveillance, and enforcement. The path chosen will determine not only the fate of one government, but the character of British democracy itself. As Parliament clears and the noise subsides, the significance of this moment lingers. This was not the end of a debate. It was the beginning of a reckoning, one that will shape how freedom is understood, protected, and exercised in the years to come. This moment is not just about politics, policies, or one Prime Minister. It is about people. Ordinary citizens who work hard, raise families, and ask only to be treated with fairness and respect. Democracies survive not because governments are powerful, but because the public remains engaged, compassionate, and vigilant. Disagreement is not division. It is the sign of a society that still cares. Whatever your view, the future of Britain depends on voices being heard, questions being asked, and dignity being preserved. Freedom is strongest when it is defended calmly, thoughtfully, and together.